to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor in chief of the Washington Outsider. Today, we are discussing the topic of BRICS and its various projects. To what extent is the organization successful? What are some avenues it is pursuing that are beyond the big headlines? What projects other members are looking to advance together? To discuss this interesting issue with us is Nisarg Jani, who is currently leading the Center for Science and Technology at the Geostrata. He's a doctoral candidate at Pandit Dayal Energy University. His research domain is the industrial policy of integrated circuits, designing and manufacturing. And he is a research analyst at Geostrata. Thank you so much for joining us today. Nisarg, it's a pleasure to have you here. Before we get into this topic, could you tell us a little bit about your work at the center, how you got into this topic, and what are your uh, interests in terms of your research at Geostrata?
Well, I joined Geostrata a year back, and we started this Science and Technology Center to focus specifically on how technology and the global politics work together. So currently, I'm a doctoral candidate at my university, and as I said, my research is on integrated circuits, of the industrial policy of industry of integrated circuit workout. Right. So I mean, there's a rich literature on how the science has affected the politics, right? Uh, there are some dark sides of it as well. There are some bright sides of it as well. So it always made me inquisitive that how science is pursued by the civilization, right? There's a saying that all the history of the world is a history of transfer of technology from one civilization to the other, right? And that's the curiosity that brought me into this domain. And I don't have a technical background. I did my bachelor's in international relations and my master's as well in the same subject matter. But I always had an interest in how science works out. So that's about me. And since we are talking about bricks, so let me tell you something.
Mhm.
Oh, okay, can we stop it?
Yes, let's look at BRICS, and let's look first of all as a basic background about the organization. I know that BRICS started out as only a few countries, but recently added new members. It appears to be expanding. Some view it as specifically anti-Western alliance. On the other hand, India specifically is looking to play an independent foreign policy role. How do you see this? Uh, before we get into the more specific issues of what its members are working on, how do you see this contradiction between India's goals to be as a country looking to pursue independent policy and that is engaged in a variety of different alliances, and the BRICS role that is looking to itself as an alternative to the Western backed leadership such as NATO?
See, this is the thing. I actually kind of reject the premises of considering BRICS as an anti-Western organization altogether. Although I understand the politics behind it, but more than that, the BRICS as an organization is a collective of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Together, all these countries, if we gather all the economies of these countries, it is equivalent to the whole Western economy, right? So we have an economic parity with the West, right? So considering it as an anti-Western alliance is kind of, we are just reinventing the Cold War mentality again and again. So, and that's what India stands for. India considers BRICS as an organization that focuses on the development of the middle class, the large middle class that has emerged in this nation, right? So, what more can I say about it?
So, given the important economic role that you see these countries playing. What is the potential for them to work together, given the assorted um, contradictions in policy intentions that you see on the one hand, and on the other hand, um, uh, some of the commonalities that they have. How do you balance divergent geopolitical interests with common goals?
See, the thing is, I'm a realist. Like,
Mm-hmm.
whatever my research that I do on, I have a realistic underpinning, theoretical underpinning in my outlook of the world. So I believe that nation states, by their very nature, focus more on security rather than economic development. And the thing about the BRICS nation is that right now there is no security consensus among the BRICS nations. And the subject matter that I'm working in, the technological aspect of how BRICS nation can communicate among themselves, how they can cooperate in the domain of the technology. So the thing is, I am not being able to see how a security consensus can build up in BRICS right now. BRICS is more of an economic order,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as I said, like some months back, I was watching the interview of President Putin with Financial Times, I guess. Financial Times, yes, it was with Financial Times, where he talked about the growing sentiment of anti-globalization in the world and why the Trump factor emerged in the world. So the thing is, the promise that globalization provided back in the 1990s was that the development, if we follow certain policies in our governance of the nation as well as our market, the income will trickle down to the lower class as well. But that didn't happen when we saw the reality of the globalization. More than that, it just backfired. It completely backfired to what globalization promised. Globalization promised us the classic American dream, having a car, having family, having a stable source of income. But unfortunately, what happened is the income parity, the income inequality actually increased after globalization. And that's why right now we see in the West, the, the conservative forces in the West are more focusing on anti-globalization. While the Democrats are doing the same thing in that as well, though their rhetoric is completely different in that, but they are kind of institutionalizing the same thing all in overall. And specifically in the domain of technology, because that's my expertise in fact, and I can talk about that. They are of the opinion that the technologies like quantum communication, like the whole semiconductor narrative, they consider it as a small yard, high concept. So they consider that this technology are critical for the security establishment of the powerful, right? So we have to take all the measures that we can to stop the flow of it, or at least not, maybe not to stop the whole flow of it, but to control its flow. We need to channelize it to the nation who are in a consensus, in a political consensus with us. And that's why China and US are kind of in a what we call, I mean, the political analysts just connected with the Thucydides trap. Like there's a famous book by that title as well. But I don't believe that. More than that, I believe this is kind of a Cold War, that the classical Cold War that we saw some years back. Before me, I was not even born in that era. But as we saw, there were two factions in the world who controlled the world order, who decided the world order, and all the alliances that were getting created in the world were dependent on on their consensus with one of those, right? But BRICS as an organization, it is somewhat showing a third way. It is more focusing on, and from an Indian standpoint, India considers BRICS as an organization that has a common goal, and the goal is the economic development of the Middle East within this nation. And that's about it. Right?
So it's interesting because right now we see also two. There's been a lot of talk of two competing economic power structures. The Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically an infrastructure-based policy integrating China's interests with essentially a lot of the countries that used to be on the historic Silk Road. And on the other hand, you have India pursuing similar trade interests. There's been a talk of India's role in the um corridor, economic corridor with the Middle East and Europe also, uh the role it's playing integrating Africa and Europe as well. How do you see these two parallel systems interact in the future, with given the fact that both countries are members of BRICS and are looking to for economic cooperation, but on the other hand also have clear economic competition in all over the globe in and have parallel initiatives to that effect?
So you want me to talk about how India is also somewhat creating something similar to BRI because it is not, right?
How so?
India,
What? How do you see these two different? I understand that it's not the same. You know, it's not the same
yes,
kind of system. It's a parallel one. So how do you see this? On the one hand, do you see other elements of competition and other elements of cooperation, and how do these two different models coexist, given that both countries are within the
yes, of
same
course.
economic
Right.
alliance?
See, the thing is, India is opposing BRI for the very reason that the BRI is integrating those territories that are sovereign part of our nation. And that's the only thing that is stopping us from joining BRI. And there are other factors as well. There's a certain level of trust deficit that India has with China because of the historical reasons that we have. And I think China as a country, China as now I'll be very specific when I discuss about what's a country. So when I talk about China, I'm talking about its political establishment, not its people. Right.
Hmm.
Always try to see the state in two forms. There are people and there are the government who represent, right? So the current political establishment of China has a hawkish outlook when it looks at India, right? It is really doing a great job in VRI, and I respect that, and India even respects that. But there is a certain issue of the territorial integrity,
Mm-hmm.
territorial and sovereign integrity of our nation that is at stake when we talk about VR. And in fact, I have been following VRI a lot. In fact, in GeoStrata, there's a different wing of it called Covering China, and in that we track almost 60 to 70 BRI projects all around the world, right? And there's a common theme that is emerging in that. This is the modus operandi of that. All right. So look at CCP like a venture capital. Now, what do venture capitalists? They look at a project, they see some merit to it, they consider that if I invest my capital in this, in long term, it will create something up. It will create wealth for me, right? And that's the very reason China has invested so much financial capital and human resources in developing BRI. And also see where the majority of the BRI projects are focused. They are in African continent. And when we talk about the African continent, the continent is currently facing a lot of political upheaval. So, and the reason behind that are also social and economic.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are the social aspects to it? China doesn't intend to get into that as much. Like there might be some covert operations in that is not my expertise. But what I can tell about China's role in African nations, specifically in BRI, is just to create a integrate those economies all together using infrastructure. So they will go there, they will start a project, they will start urbanization of certain nations, they will connect the strategic economic zones within different nations. and try to mainstream the lower strata of the society in the in the economy. And that's what the role of China is in BRI altogether, right? So yeah, that's what BRI is. I mean, I understand that why there is certain level of security dilemma in the West when they see how BRI has turned up. And if you know the current BRI forum, the BRI forum that had happened last year, so many countries visited that. The West used to say that the Chinese and the Russian bloc has been isolated completely. But unfortunately, that's not the truth. They are as much accepted and as much considered as a third way to the economic development that West has created for the world. And that's the reason why BRI is working,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no other reason other than that. I mean, we can paint some, you know, we can boast about the, you know, the great power politics of China in creating BRI. That's there's some truth to that. I'm not denying that fact. But the main thesis of China in developing BRI is development, development, and development. They want to develop economic and they want to develop communities. They want to develop economic centers within the continents where the development has not reached. The promise that globalization didn't fulfill for those nations. And it wants and China wants to create markets also. And those markets will demand goods and services that China is ready to provide. That's what BRI is also.
Do you see it?
And when
Mm-hmm.
And the reason India is not considering BRI in its strategic calculation is merely the fact that it is not recognizing our territorial and sovereign integrity. That's the only reason. And if I can surely say that once, and this day will come, I promise you that when India and China will reset a parity at an economic and security parity and the technological parity, that will happen within the next 10 to 20 years. The tensions that China and India are facing right now will cool down because China has to respect the power. China has to respect India. That's the the crux of it.
Do you think the current political distrust can be an obstacle to this economic cooperation? Or, on the other hand, do you think that there are completely separate, that there are some completely independent and separate issues that these countries can work on? Do you see, for instance, some of the countries in BRICS actually becoming, part of the BRI scheme, or do you see that remaining solely China's own project?
I mean, let's talk about technology now.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about the BRI. That I mean, yes, of course, majority of the BRICS nations, other than India, are a part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and they are getting the funding from China for their development, for their economic development, for their infrastructure development, to be very precise. So that's it. BRI is nothing more than a financial aid that China is providing to all these nations to develop the infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
that will once generate output for the Chinese economy. That's what BRI is.
So going back now to technology and something you said earlier about semiconductors, that's been one of India's particularly strong points. Do you see India as creating a technological BRI, so to speak, essentially becoming a bridge builder in sort of technology, in advancing technological developments in other countries? Or do you?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, of course. India has a strong semiconductor policy right now. The central government has declared 76,000 crores for developing the semiconductor ecosystem in our nation. And as a matter of fact, many of the states, many of the provinces within India have also declared their own semiconductor policy, right? And slowly and steadily, before we talk about any industry, we need to understand what are the upstreams, midstreams, and downstreams of these industries, right? When we talk about the midstreams of the semiconductor industry, as the global semiconductor ecosystem, there are certain industries which are known as fabricators of the chip. There are certain industries who are known as the designers of this. Now, the designing aspect is really strong in the Western world, specifically in US and Europe, which India needs in its own ecosystem. That's why I visited the Vibrant Gujarat Global Business Summit recently, and we saw many South Korean, American, and even Japanese companies showing a lot of interest in India's semiconductor ecosystem. The sole reason being the government is willing to work on. The other reason being we have a resilient ecosystem in our nation as well. And at the same time, India has a strong engineering talent. Like how you see in India, in every household you will find one engineer in either of it, in electronics, in automobiles, or in mechanic, the engineering aspects of the disciplines, right? So India has a strong economic, strong human talent. India has a political willingness to develop the semiconductor ecosystem in our nation, and India has a potential of growth as well. The world outside of India is very turbulent. There are nations fighting the civilizational issues that have been just knuckled under for years, and they are just emerging now. That we saw in Ukraine, and the same thing we saw in the Middle East right now, what we
Mm-hmm.
call West Asia for India, right? But India has the political stability. India has a market. India has a strong human talent, and for the semiconductor companies around the world, the midstream companies that I talk about, the TSMCs, the Samsungs, the Intels, the Microns, they only see that India has a political stability that other nations don't have, right? And that's why they are interested in our nation in developing the semiconductor ecosystem of our country.
Interestingly enough, we see that one of the newer members to BRICS, Saudi Arabia, has recently started to invest in semiconductor developing countries as a financial investment. To what
Yes,
extent do you see Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE and others potentially becoming interested in their own semiconductor industries other than just investing in existing projects somewhere else? And do you think India could see itself cooperating with them on such projects?
yes. As a matter of fact, if you are aware about a company known as AMD, do you know what is AMD?
No.
It's a it creates the central processing units and the graphical processing units in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So AMD used to manufacture its own chips so till late 2000, till 2010. And there's this thing in semiconductor industry known as fabrication. Those are large industrial clusters who have cutting edge equipment, who have the talent, and who have the whole ecosystem to produce chips for the world. And that's why Taiwan is so much strategic for the West because Taiwan owns TSMC, Taiwan State Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. Right. TSMC creates chips for everyone of us. You see all the things around us, the computers that we are using right now, the mobile phones that we are using right now. Everything has chips, and those chips are created by TSMC, and it's a very strategic industry for the West. Right. So coming back to AMD. So AMD sold its fabrication, its manufacturing unit to a company known as Global Foundries in United Arab Emirates. I have to check it. It was either in 2011 or 2012. So as a matter of fact, the nations that you talked about, UAE, Saudi Arabia, they are already in the loop of the global semiconductor ecosystem. And an Israeli company, I'm forgetting the name of it. It it even submitted its proposal to develop semiconductors in India to set up their plant in India, but there were some reasons that the Indian establishment rejected it, and I don't know the reasons of it.
Mm-hmm.
But right, so those countries are, as a matter of fact, the whole world, the semiconductor value chain is so complex and so complicated that each and every nation somehow or the other is contributing. Right. The rare earth minerals, those are provided by, it is all around the world. But the other minerals that are really important to develop semiconductors, those are provided by Africa. There are cobalt mines in Africa, which are very important for developing the electronic vehicles. They also develop certain minerals that are used in our chips that we use. So yeah, everyone is a part of the semiconductor ecosystem. No one is outside of it.
Um,
But some have it more than some of them. Like the West has more than us, and that's a it's it's a completely reason of dollars and cents. Why will I invest somewhere? Why will I invest? Because I want the output of my capital,
mhm.
right? And India is the place that provides the return that the companies need, right?
So interestingly enough, this race for raw materials in Africa, China has been on the forefront of it, but India, as you just mentioned, also has strong relationships there. And to what extent do you think it could be a pathway for delivery of raw materials for semiconductor development to the rest of the world?
I didn't get your question. Can you come again?
To what extent can India's relationships in Africa facilitate the delivery of critical raw materials for advancement of technologies such as semiconductors in the West and the rest of the world?
Okay, the thing is, the Indian semiconductor industry, they are they are more of a facilitator of the greater India.
Mm-hmm,
So India is currently focusing on the assembling of the semiconductor.
mm-hmm,
So when you are talking about the minerals, it forms the upstream of what is semiconductor. Semiconductors are basically the material available in nature who have semiconducting properties. So in our school, the science in our school, we understood that there are insulators and conductors of electricity, right? There are certain material who can pass electricity through them, and there are some material that cannot pass electricity from. Semiconductor material falls somewhere in between. Right? If you add certain amount of chemicals to it, that what is called deposition of semiconductor, it will start conducting electricity, and through that you can control the flow of electrons within the circuit. Now, when you talk about the role of African continent in semiconductor industry, it is related to the upstream of this.
mm-hmm.
So before we see a chip, right, in its original form, it's in form of a silicon. Silicon is available in nature. Now those silicons are converted into silicon ingots. It's a completely different industry altogether. And as a matter of fact, China is leading that industry. So you see the connection between the China and the African nations in that supply chain. Out of 10 wafers created in China, 8 of them are used in compound semiconductors, which we use in our electronic vehicles, in our charging equipment. And as a matter of fact, I mean, my mind was blown when I got to know this news. The Xiaomi, if you know about the Xiaomi, it's a mobile company.
Could you
Can you
tell
hear
us?
me?
Yeah, could you expand on that a little bit?
So Xiaomi is a mobile company. It creates smartphone, but recently it launched an electronic vehicle of its own. So an industry that was completely in a different product segment altogether, right, is now developing a completely different product which is nowhere like in the loop. I mean, it is beyond our imagination that what is possible if we are able to control the supply chain. Flow of the supply chains is the way of creating wealth, right? So when you talk about Africa and India in terms of semiconductors, there are no connections to that.
So one of the things, speaking of semiconductors, one of the issues that I've been looking at is whether, some are arguing that Moore's law, which basically says that improvements in technology would lead to computers becoming twice as efficient every 2 years, that it's dead. But others are saying that there are multiple new alternatives that range from remodeling the chip to using the existing types of chips more efficiently to creating completely other non-chip types of technologies using new elements or using quantum technologies or just using different other types of methods to overcome that problem. How do you see that?
So the law that you are talking about is called Moore's law.
Mm-hmm,
So it basically says that the size of the transistor, the basic element inside a chip, will get miniaturized with time. And right now, that law is coming to its end. And the reason behind it is that we are creating chips at a nanometer scale. Like TSMC has promised that by 2030, it will start manufacturing one chips having transistor of 1 nanometer. You know how much is 1 nanometer? Your hair is around 30,000 nanometers. So 1 nanometer is like you need a microscope to see that. So the Moore's law is
mm-hmm,
coming to its end, and the way out of it is advanced tech, the chiplet technology that you are talking. So basically, chiplet technology is you don't need to create a core. Like I don't have a chip right now in my hand. Yeah, I can show you that one single chip, the Intel's processing unit. My laptop has Intel Core i5 8th generation. So it's a core, right? Now, if I get a lot of these different types of core within one single PCB, printed circuit board, I can have the same level of efficiency that only one single chip provided. And as a matter of fact, many semiconductor manufacturing companies and designing companies are focusing on leverage. And the benefit of this chiplet technology is that you don't have to purchase new IPs for that. Like you understand the concept of intellectual property. If I create something, I can IP it on my name.
mm-hmm,
But the thing is, the cutting edge chips that are getting created right now, that are getting designed right now, they are very much protected. They are behind the small yard high fence narrative that I was talking about before. So China is working really well in the advanced packaging sector, and as a matter of fact, many risk analysts in in the West are talking that the advanced packaging IP has the largest vulnerability in corporate espionage. You understand corporate
sure,
espionage,
of course.
right? So in the advanced packaging sector, that's the highest vulnerability that the Western semiconductor companies are facing. That is getting developed like anything. I mean, it is really interesting.
And what do you see the most likely direction that this effort to advance beyond Moore's law to take from a technical standpoint?
I believe that the new and emerging ecosystems that are developing, like India, and there are many, it's not only India, there is also Malaysia, there's Singapore, there are many countries who are willing to develop their semiconductor ecosystem. Some are ahead of the game, some are not that much ahead of the game. And frankly speaking, India has just, you know, gotten out of its slumber. I mean, our Prime Minister on record on an interview said that India should have started the semiconductor industry 30 years back. And coming back to the original point, I think the new ecosystems they should focus more on developing ecosystems for advanced packaging.
Mm-hmm,
Right. Currently, all the politicians, all the all the new ecosystems. I'm not singling out only the politicians, but politicians love to open a huge facility and just get into the ribbon cutting ceremony, right? So, and specifically in developing the fabrication, but creating a fabrication ecosystem in India is like reinventing the wheel altogether. I'm of the opinion that new ecosystem should focus on developing ecosystems in advanced phase.
mm-hmm,
And all the fundamental researches, all the applied researches should focus on developing an advanced packaging ecosystem in our country. Because that's the offset that you will have in the future. Any policy has to be created with an outlook of almost 3 to 4 decades. And right now the policies within India are focusing more on developing the legacy nodes, the old what they call 40 to 80 nanometer chips, also 28 nanometer chips that are used in the daily consumer goods. Like if you just go and open your dishwasher, there's a chip inside. So India is focusing on developing those chips. But I'm of the opinion that it should now focus on the advanced packaging. because that will be the future of the industry.
And to what extent do you think other members of BRICS can contribute to this creation of this ecosystem? Do you think they can play a relevant role, or do you think they just, in what to what extent is it from a technical standpoint, from investment standpoint, or some other role?
Yes, of course. I mean, BRICS is a great institution that can focus on one aspect of the semiconductor technology. As a matter of fact, I mean, unfortunately, BRICS isn't currently focusing on that
Mm-hmm.
in the advanced semiconductors. There are some institutional mechanisms that can be leveraged within the BRICS to develop this, this specific technology together. So we have some really interesting players in this within our BRICS. One is China. China is a good, I mean, not at the par with the West, but a good enough ecosystem that can be used for the BRICS nation. So China can enter into the technology transfer program to develop certain aspects of advanced packaging within the BRICS nation to create a completely different alliance altogether of the BRICS that will develop the ecosystem in advanced packaging together of the BRICS nation. And they can work with the Western companies that are currently developing this goods and services. So yeah, I mean, BRICS can be a great contender. I mean, a great center for developing the advanced packaging sector.
One of the issue technical projects within BRICS that I have heard being developed is a Russia, China, and Saudi cooperation on quantum telecommunications. What would that look like, and why is it necessary, given the proliferation of secure messaging apps like Signal?
See, I mean, if I'm not aware about Saudi being a part of it, but I do know that there's some cooperation between Russia and China in quantum communications. So China recently launched the world's first quantum communication satellite, and it is very interesting to know how the quantum communication works. So basically, I mean, the way we are talking right now, what is happening at the real time? My face is getting captured by my laptop's camera, and that information is going to my microprocessor, and it is converting into bits
Mm-hmm,
and transferring that all together till you. And your computer is also is able to decrypt their information in the way that you can watch my face. Now, quantum communication doesn't happen in bits. It doesn't happen in the binary, the ones and the zeros, the binary language on which our
mm-hmm,
computers work. They work on photons, right? And photons have it's a subatomic particle. So when you look deeper into the subatomic particles, they are existing in all the none of the forms together. So there's a very beautiful aphorism between Albert Einstein, a debate between Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr. So in the fundamental research of quantum, I'm talking about. So at that time, there were two debates in the scientific community. One one community used to believe that whatever is happening in an atom, right, it is deterministic. You understand deterministic. A causes B causes C causes D.
mm-hmm,
And there's another faction who is of the opinion that it is probabilistic. It is not deterministic. All things are happening together and nothing is happening at the same time.
mm-hmm,
So many possibilities are happening at the same time at a subatomic scale. So I mean, Albert Einstein used to say that God doesn't play dice with the world, right? So you understand that God is not working on probabilities. God has some plan to everything. But Niels Bohr, the another Niels Bohr is a very famous physicist, if you are aware of him. He was also part of the atomic project. I mean, his fundamental research was very instrumental in developing the atom bomb. He said that don't tell God what to do, right? So the, coming back to quantum communication. So the information that passes through the quantum channel, it is happening at the same time. And I'll explain you this with an example. Suppose Alice and Bob are on a common communication channel, and there's tester in between who is trying to surveil on what the information is passing. Now, when he goes to the conventional channel, he can
Mm-hmm.
surveil it easily because the information is passing in the ones and the zeros, and it can be easily traced. None of the person on both the side of channel can know about it. But when someone tries to intercept a quantum channel, the encryption, the person who is decrypting that information will get to know that someone is watching it. Why does that happen? So when tester tries to surveil, just tries to poke into the communication channel, the photons that are passing through, they will completely change their nature. They will turn into bits. So they pass in the form of few bits, but suddenly they will change that their nature. The person at the decrypting side, the person who is receiving that information will get an alert. If someone is watching this communication, and suddenly the communication will stop. And that's how quantum communication works. So it's more secure rather than the conventional form of communication. And China is able has launched a satellite that launches quantum keys from the space within a region. So I have some data with me about that. Really interesting. So China has built the world's first integrated quantum communication network. It combines over 700 optical fibers on the ground with two ground to satellites. So and it has also tested this technology with Russia. So it's a network. A quantum communication network is completely different from a conventional network. It will demand different end equipment. The mobiles, the computers that we use, they need a quantum processor that is able to generate information in the form of quantum technology. And also the optical fibers that are used, right? So China has successfully prototyped that technology within its geographical area as well as with Russia. So China is way ahead in this game. But at the same time, the fundamental research, there are two types of research. There is a fundamental research and there is an applied research. So when we talk about the fundamental research of the quantum communication, the West has an edge over that. But when it comes to application, China has an edge over everyone. I mean, I cannot say with the West as well, but it is somewhat at par with what West has right now. So China is a really interesting player in the BRICS, and it can make things happen. But given the fact that we have some trust deficit there with China and with other parts of it, even the Maldives that is currently happening. So that's the only thing stopping in focusing more on developing BRICS as an organization.
So while we're seeing this sort of project, in its research and I guess development phase, what other projects and forms of cooperation between different members on a technical level um are also in the works, and what should we be hearing about soon?
I mean, are you talking about the quantum communication specifically or all the technologies?
Anything. Of course, I'm interested also to hear anything quantum related, but also anything else that might be interesting because there's actually not a lot of media coverage on the technology aspect of this cooperation and of what BRICS is doing. There's a lot about the common currency, speculation whether or not it will happen, but in a lot about financial avenues and financial instruments that are being built, but not a lot about the technology.
Right. So within the BRICS nation, as I said, China and Russia are cooperating a lot in developing quantum communication. Right. Russia has even developed an air defense system that uses quantum communication system. And China has also allegedly, I mean, there are some reports on this that China has developed a radar that works in quantum communication. So there are certain fighter jets who have ability to absorb the radar. A radar works on a principle. It emits it emits itself around everywhere within the place within the geography it wants to surveil. So these fighter jets have ability to absorb that. So the radar cannot catch it. But if we use quantum based material within the radar system, even those materials can be caught because the quantum particles are very sensitive to observation. Right, right now, if a quantum particle is passing through me behind me, if I just move around and see, it will change its property. It is that much sensitive, and no one really understands why it behaves like that. Uh, So China has certain applications of it. Russia has certain applications of it, but the technology is not getting transferred to the other countries at the same time because it's a critical technology. It has a military application, and no country will share such critical technology with someone they don't trust. So again, it comes back to the trust factor within the nations of the BRICS.
There is, of course, a lot of interest in military applications of some of these issues. What do you think is the most innovative um, direction we should be looking at and expecting from the latest research?
You, I mean, quantum has many applications. There's also something called quantum computing. Like you, when you create a quantum communication ecosystem. You create a quantum communication network. There are also ways to even surveil that as well. We have that technology as well. So rather than focusing merely on its military applications, the China, I mean, I cannot talk about Brazil or South Africa because I don't have that much knowledge of what those countries are doing within themselves. But I can safely say that India has invested a lot in quantum communication. As a matter of fact, uh, I was reading about it. India has its own quantum national quantum mission where it has allocated around 6,000 crores in developing a quantum ecosystem in our nation as well. Is it 6,000 crores? I have to check it. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. As at the same time, our Indian Army's signal unit has also developed a quantum communication ecosystem for military communication, right? And that technology is provided by a Bengaluru-based startup known as UNU Labs. So India has certain possibilities in developing its own quantum ecosystem, and all you need is a strong human talent to develop that. You also need government support for that, but also ability to collaborate among the other nations. The scientific community, if you look at them, I won't say they are apolitical, but they see the world in a very different way. Like people like me, who has a background in political science,
Mm-hmm.
who has an outlook for the world, I see that there are political solutions to socio-economic problems. That's how I see that. But the scientific community doesn't see that. For an engineer, everything is an engineering. So they want people who in the scientific community just want to do science for the science's sake. They are of the opinion that my technology will be used for the greater good, for solving a problem within the society. And that's how they think. But unfortunately, that's not how reality works. We have a military, like we have a security ecosystem. Again, realistic, the realist theory that I'm talking,
Mm-hmm.
that theoretical underpinning that nation states tend to prioritize security over economic development. So it goes down to that. That's why the collaborations do not happen among the nations who have a low level of trust among themselves in developing such critical technology. And I was also looking at some statistics. If you look at the Nature journal, if you are aware of it, it's one of the best rated journals in the world, like the top tier journal. If you publish in that, you are really something. Like you are widely respected. Most of the researches, most of the researches that the Nature publishes originate from China. All the major application-based research are happening in China, and there's a very little margin between United States and China in developing this technology. And as a matter of fact, just like in Cold War, US and Russia used to collaborate a lot space, in space technology. And AI that we are talking about, it is considered the next offset. So a nation who has a strong AI, a strong artificial intelligence framework. It will decide what will be the modernity for the next decade, for the other civilization, right? So China and US are collaborating in that a lot as well in AI. So when you look at the scientific community, they are they see this protectionism, this small yard high fence narratives as a detriment to collaboration, and science thrives on that.
So interestingly, speaking of AI, to what extent do you see one of the biggest problems that many people have pointed out to is the fact that a lot of generative AI is aimed at English language communities, and there is a significant linguistic shortcoming in that respect. To what extent do you
Yes,
see India overcoming that problem or playing a role in development of um, other language models?
yes, of course. I mean, India has to focus on the developing its own sovereign AI. That's what the business community calls it. The India needs to focus on developing a sovereign AI. So large LLM models, they should develop their GPT models using the Indian languages. And India is a really diverse country. Like I'm in Gujarat, it's a state in India. There's a Gujarati dialect in my city, and if you just travel 80 kilometers in that direction, that dialect will completely change. And I mean, if India aims to develop all these LLMs using these languages, it will be something for the country. I mean, India has a lot of potential in developing the AI, and it is not only limited to the GPT framework, the
Mm-hmm.
GPT technology that we're talking about, the generative AI. There are also other applications of AI as well that India should focus on, and I see that the semiconductor ecosystem is, I mean, the Indian establishment is really doing a great job in developing the semiconductor ecosystem, the current government. But at the same time, not only the government, even the companies, even the engineering universities, they need to develop the downstream industries that demand this semiconductors, who can appreciate this semiconductor, right? On which this I mean, AI and semiconductors is deeply integrated. I mean, the AI, the companies that are developing AI models will only demand the cutting edge semiconductors, right? So if India also develops an ecosystem in AI, and the semiconductor will follow this, right? So a lot of work has to be done in the downstream industries as well, and AI is one of them. So is the quantum computation, and so is all the other cutting edge technologies that are out there that India should develop on its own based on collaboration.
So one interesting issue is the fact that technology in general, a lot of it has been looked at as an important component of hard power for its military applications, industrial applications, essentially the way countries assert themselves on the international stage and project their might. But there's also a way to look at it as a projection of its applications in soft power, in the use
Yes,
of export of technologies to developing countries, sharing elements that could be critical in healthcare, um, educational improvements, and facilitation of basically institutional and civil society building. To what extent do you see that direction being pursued right now in BRICS among its members and by India specifically?
so yes, I mean the BRICS nation should look at technology not as something for securitization of itself. Technology has its military applications, and most of the technologies that has developed in the world have emerged out of a conflict. I mean, that's the reality. That's the hard field that we all need to follow.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue is not technology. The issue is the civilizational conflict that we are facing. I mean, we should work on that. And I mean, the civilizations communicate among themselves. As I said, all the human history is the history of technology transfer among the civilizations. But those civilizations were talking to it, right? They were not talking at each other. They were talking to each other. And that's how the technology will develop. So the BRICS nation, the BRICS as an organization, its
Mm-hmm.
first priority should be to resolve the civilization conflicts among themselves, to resolve any, the conflicts that are among themselves. They should focus on that. And all the other collaborations, the technology collaborations that you are talking about, they will follow this thing. Why would you and me collaborate when there is some trust issue, right? If there is no trust, we won't collaborate in anything.
Sure.
So again, it comes back to the trust deficit that is among the BRICS nations, which needs to be addressed openly.
And more specifically about India, how do you see it's utilizing its growing international cloud to kind of and bring technology to countries that are less developed, how or to collaborate just generally globally on other issues that are not that in various soft power sectors and sectors such as education, healthcare, and essentially building up civil societies and communities.
Yes. So the thing is, India is really working great in technological collaboration with another countries. I mean, the National Forensic Science University. It is a institute of national importance of India. It has opened its branches in many African nations. I mean, recently one of them was opened in Tanzania. Also, I mean, India and the West has a very friendly relation in terms of this technology. Like recently, India and the US agreed on ICET. It's the platform for transferring critical technologies between India and United States. So India is kind of looking at this in a very multipolar. I mean, the world around us is habituated to look at the world in two factions, the West and the rest, and that's how the institutions have developed. I mean, this is a this is an institutional problem which has a social solution. That's how I see it. The world has many power centers. The world is completely different to what it was 45 years ago, and it is high time that even the West acknowledges that everyone is not. I mean, they're satellite. Frankly speaking, they have a certain parity with them. I mean, India really did a good job in sustaining its strategic autonomy. People use People tend to blame India that it sits on no one side, but that's not what India is standing for. India has a huge population. We are representative of a human. We are also large chunk of people who represent the general human, and our politicians are accountable to those people, right? So it won't fall within those Western narratives that India one is a Western ally or an Eastern ally. India is a nation, is an independent sovereign nation, and so is China, and so is South Africa, and so is Brazil, and so is Russia. Our mutual interests Our mutual interests get matched. That's why we collaborate, and when they don't, we don't collaborate. It's actually that simple and that complicated at the same time.
Finally, looking from the more general to more specific and the center that you are working at, what direction of technology and politics are you observing currently? What do you see as the trends to watch and the issues to be concerned about and interested in? What are the top priorities that you are now focusing on?
So my top priority is working on semiconductors. I mean, we need
Mm-hmm.
to have an edge, have a critical role in the value. I'm talking about what India should do, and I'll be very specific to India. India should really focus on developing the tech ecosystem of it. The semiconductor it includes all the upstream, midstream, and downstream industries. And semiconductor is what it is considered the meta technology. So India needs to work on a war front in developing our semiconductor ecosystem. And at the same time, the downstream industry, they should also be developed. I mean, there's a saying in Gujarati, "Kuવામાં હોય તો હવાડામાં હોવું જોઈએ." So what it really means is if it is in the well, it will be in the bucket, right? So semiconductors is the well and the bucket are those critical technologies. So when the well is filled, you can fill up those buckets as well. So India should really work on that. And I mean, my day starts with looking at how the nations are communicating, what the national ecosystems are working on, what are the policy trends that are developing, are they more business friendly, and what are the political and economic repercussions of following one policy cycle. So yes, I mean my science and technology center will focus on looking at those trends and be really articulative about what is best for India and for the world.
One major technological trend that there's been some news about is the successful creation of digital economy in the commercial retail mid-level space in India, which has allowed a lot of smaller and middle class um, businesses to become competitive compared to retail giants. Do you see any other spheres facing this sort of digital disruption? And do you see, and to what extent do you also see that also becoming a concern from a cybersecurity point of view? If you have a lot of digitization in the economy and then you get attacked from by hackers and adversarial forces, can it not also cripple your economy? Is it not a double-edged sword?
So yes, of course. I mean, there will be there will be people who are not that much happy about your growth. And if you are developing, you are integrating your economy with this technologies, with the information technology. They are vulnerable to getting attacked by the criminals who can be state sponsored or who may have their own interests. That's not the issue. But I mean, this is also a great way of collaboration among the BRICS nations. I mean, the BRICS nations can also enter into a confidence build on creating a confidence building measures among themselves in cyberspace. I mean, there are lots of legal precedents in that already. I mean, the United Nations is talking about a lot. The International Telecommunication Union has lots of laws that are talking about creating the institutional structures that focus on protecting the critical infrastructure. And each and every nation who is a part of those agreements, those confidence building measures, they ensure that such law and order is ensured in their own geography. That my geography should not be used by anyone to carry out a cyber attack on another BRICS nation if I'm a signatory to that confidence building measure. So BRICS can also collaborate on that front as well in the cyber. So it's more of a law and order issue rather than
Mhm.
that's how I see it. I mean, we have our own domestic law and order system, and it just needs to be, you know, looked at a larger scale, and that's how these multilateral organizations can work. I mean, there's also an organization called BIMSTEC amongst India and the Southeast Asian nations. So India is developing a computer emergency response team for all these BIMSTEC nations. India is drafting out that proposal, and India is developing its own certain team, CERT in the computer emergency response team for this BIMSTEC nations to ensure that the issues of cybersecurity do not happen among these countries. And if they do happen, they will collaborate to find the root of it and who is responsible for it.
And besides this digital retail space, where do you see that sort of kind of technological upgrade disruption go next? What other spheres? What, do you think it's some other commerce? Do you think it's the legal sphere, the court system? Do you see it's some other issue that's becoming kind of digitized next in India?
I mean, our financial system is digitizing at an unprecedented pace, right? India is the first nation to launch the unified payment interface, and this UPI is also getting used in the bilateral trade between India and Singapore. So basically, uh, the lower middle class and the poor, those who are at the peripheries of the society, have one thing in common: the smartphone. Everyone has a smartphone in their hand,
Mm-hmm.
and after a long policy cycle, India has a great banking system. It has brought a huge chunk of people within the mainstream financial ecosystem, right? And after doing that, we have this such platforms such as UPI. We have platforms, the Jan account, if you are aware of it. So every farmer, everyone has a bank account, right? To which they can transfer the cash among themselves.
Sure.
And this has also stopped uh, the menace of black. A lot of money that was getting lost in the system uh, has been brought back because everything is happening online. Everything is a digital trace to it. So that has also stopped the menace of the drug running, the gun running. I mean, all the illegal activities where finances are used. The, within on my life, I have seen that my use of currency, the digital hard cash, has decreased like anything. I mean, if I even go at a general store, if I show them the cash, they will tell me, please transfer money using UPI. I don't have the change. So that's the level of penetration of digital products in the financial ecosystem of India.
Well, there's certainly a lot to watch, a lot of interesting dynamics happen, and there's likely to going to be a lot more in the near future. Thank you for shedding light on these very important and interesting developments. I think technology sphere is one of the uh, greatest innovative sectors that we are seeing right now. I think we are going to see a lot more. There'll be a lot to discuss in terms of biotechnology, nanotechnologies, I think, I'm sure. And I'm definitely going to keep my eye on all of this and on how these breakthroughs continue strengthening, but on the other hand, also challenging relations, politics, disrupting discourse, and advancing different levels of understanding among nations and among alliances. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today and for participating in this program. It's a very important discussion, and hopefully a lot more to learn and to investigate
Yeah.
in the years to come. For those joining us today, this was the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Please tune in next week, next Tuesday, as usual, 9 p.m. for our future program. And thank you for joining us today. Uh, thanks to our guest, and have a great night.